You know, it's like you start out getting interested in birds and bird watching, and you don't know where anything's going to lead. That's really rather alarming. Some of it could be an artifact of where the survey routes are and development pressures along those routes. Um, and some of it, I'd say most of it, probably is real and relates to the fact that the kind of habitat that Canada warblers thrive in is either successionally ephemeral, doesn't last for a real long time, or regarded as kind of waste forest because it's so wet and can't produce commercially valuable timber, and so has tended to be converted into non-forest landscape, human-dominated landscape that isn't suitable for any birds breeding. You can't breed. Well, some birds can breed in the gutters of 7-Elevens, but those would be starlings and house sparrows. And it's not like every red maple swamp in the state has been converted into a strip mall. That's not the case. But I think that combination of factors, the fact that the Canada warblers really like it thick, and if it isn't poorly drained, then younger, and that combination results in their undergoing this decline. As it turns out, on our site, we're not really seeing any source of concern within the population we're studying. Their pairing success is high, their ability to fledge at least one young is high, and now in the last 2 years where we found more nests, it appears as though most of an average of just under 5 eggs are hatching, and most of those hatchlings are fledging. It's up at about 4:30, into the car by 4:50, to the parking area well before 5 because it's so close to my place. And then you're walking out in, low light and hopefully getting onto your first bird by 5:10, 5:15, 5:20, and then observing Canada warbler behavior or trying to catch birds at the crack of dawn until things warm up and activity kind of slows a bit, and singing in particular starts to die down. Then often we'll head back to the house for, in the early part of the season for a couple hours, maybe take a nap, have something to eat, and then go back out at midday to try and catch some more birds. The upper plot, you can keep your feet dry some of the time, a fair bit of the time. The lower plot, that's nigh unto impossible because of the amount of water, standing water in the plot. And then, of course, because of how wet it is and because of the time of year we're working, there's just very large numbers of biting insects. Black flies, mosquitoes, and deer flies. All three. The black flies first, the mosquitoes come in, and the mosquitoes last the entire season, and then the deer flies come maybe 3 weeks into the season and last until the end of the season as well. And so, yeah, it's funny because none of us working on the project ever really talk about it. You just kind of get used to it and suck it up, and just work with it. And, a lot of ecologists face that. A lot of bird ecologists face biting insects every breeding season. And It's just part of the working conditions. But yeah, it's thick too, and so we're never on paths, or we're often not on paths when we're trying to follow a bird or look for nests. So we're sort of like making our way as quietly and non-destructively as possible through this thick habitat. But yeah, there's certain risks. You know, you could poke your eye in a stem, or trip, or get your foot caught in some of this rough cobble. You know, sometimes you can hear water running underneath the ground, and so there's a lot of large rocks in certain places where your foot could get caught. But we're not moving that fast through it, and it's not like we're in a hurry. So it's actually a really enjoyable, once you get into the frame of mind, it's a really enjoyable way to be in the natural world, because your senses are peaked. You're taking in all of these different stimuli through all your sensory modalities, you know, and you're really tuned into this one sound and image, you know, the Canada Warbler, but you're still open to everything else you see. You know, you see snakes and mammals and reptiles and cool plants and fungi, and so all the while you're working on that single species, you're having the opportunity to experience just an enormous amount of other interesting things in the natural world. So I look forward to it. We all do. We get a little weary of the really early wake up, but we all really get a hankering to get back out there and see who's come back. You know, we have over 50% return rates for birds that we've banded in a previous season, over 60% this last year. So who's back, you know, and who gets paired first, and who's ending up in what area, what kind of site fidelity is there? It's pretty high. It's very high. Do we have any birds coming back that we banded as nestlings? You know, we've had that twice now. Which females are back? You know, we're getting increasing numbers of females banded. So, yeah, for both specific and just general reasons, we're all pretty excited to get back in the field at the beginning of the season.
So my main ideas for my thesis project is looking at nest site selection, and so looking at a lot of the vegetation characteristics surrounding a nest and how those are important in playing key roles in having a successful nest versus a unsuccessful nest that gets depredated by predators, for example, like a blue jay or a chipmunk or something. And we're also kind of tying that sort of nest work in with a lot of parental behavior. We were taking lots of video from nest watches, seeing birds come in and feeding them and getting different feeding rates, and just getting an overall kind of idea about what's going on in the nesting cycle and the nesting phasing, because it hasn't really been well documented up to this point. So just even taking notes on what day incubation started, when they hatched, when they fledged, their growth rates, things like that. I did a lot of work where I went to the nests every other day. Don't go 2 days in a row, but every other day to get measurements so I could see how fast the nestlings were growing. It was pretty amazing to me how fast they were growing. And then another portion is looking at extra pair fertilizations, which is basically when one male kind of, goes and fools around with next door neighbor's female, and or perhaps when a female comes and fools around with the next door neighbor's husband, or just a male that's coming through. I have seen females in areas, banded females in areas that they really quote unquote, shouldn't be, which is pretty interesting. And so I got a lot of the stuff about a lot of this blood work, so we were bleeding nestlings and adults to figure out whose father is whose and all that kind of stuff. And so we're still working that out. We don't really have results on that yet.
In areas that have real wet substrate, and there tends to be a mossy mat on the forest floor, they'll find a little bit of a vertical relief section in that mat, and they'll make a little concavity in that moss with a little bit of a roof over it, and then they'll bring in nest material and carve out a beautiful little bowl nest in that mossy hummock. In areas that are less wet, they'll still have a very impressive amount of cover around the nest, around the microsite of the nest, so that when they're tucking into the nest from almost every direction, you can't see the location of the nest. In fact, we'll have birds go down with food or nest material into a site and still have to spend, a half hour, or still not be able to find the nest, let's put it that way, or spend a good half hour looking for it, even though we saw that where they went down. And it's just the number of microsites that they could select. It could be like a little a number of ways that they can use a little roof out of natural material to then carve out a little bowl and put nest material in. It's amazing how difficult it is to find those nests.
And it seems like in the area of the plots at least, that almost anywhere on the ground, almost anywhere, is pretty great nesting habitat.
That's true, yeah. There may be some areas on some birds' territories that are just too exposed, but the kind of forest they're in has a very heterogeneous and complex forest floor. This is another important feature to their habitat that's probably ingrained as like a mid-grain, not coarse grain or fine grain, but mid-grain, maybe fine grain feature to the habitat that they're selecting.
You can see it's right down there. You see it at the base of that hummock? I haven't counted how many there are yet. I didn't put my hands on it. They're pretty old, so I'm a little worried about forced fledglings. If they start jumping out, you have to drop that camera. They're pretty old. Shit.
Are they moving?
Yeah.
Did one just leave?
No, I don't think so. And there's an unfertilized egg in there. But these guys are old. Oh shit.
Are we getting dive bombed by a parent?
We are getting dive bombed by both. Okay, so there's an unfertilized egg in there that I'm going to take. So, see, that's the unfertilized egg. Okay, let's get out of here. So here's the vein right here. You see it?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to poke it kind of at an angle, like probably 45-degree angle, and it should bleed pretty good. It's moving around a lot, so it's a little easier for me to do it on a surface. Nope, didn't work. You don't need a huge amount of blood, but and you also don't want to take as much from the nestlings as you do the adults. I just bled him, or her, I don't know. So I'm just kind of putting pressure on the leg where I bled her and letting it stop the bleeding and whatnot. You can take a look. Yeah, right there. It looks like it's all good. Didn't bleed too much extra, just good.
Bird is a young bird. It's an SY bird or a second year bird, which means it's first breeding season. And the way we can tell is because their molt limit, or the number of new feathers that they have or not. And so an older bird, all these feathers on the wing would look exactly the same. There'd be no color difference or wear difference. But this bird has different colors. So these feathers...
Across here, you mean?
Yeah, here, let me do this a little differently. Okay, so these feathers right here in the front, those are different color than these, and they're right. So that means that this bird kept these feathers from the juvenile plumage, which means it's a second year bird. If it was an older bird, all these feathers on the wing would all be exactly the same. So that's how you can tell when you have the bird in the hand how old they are.
If they don't.
25.75.
Boy, they got a lot of feathers.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I got a bunch.
So that means
Ben, you're gonna
that this
let us have some of
female
those
is
pictures, right?
nesting.
Sure.
She's incubating then.
Well, no,
I
she's
never
just
knew they
she's done
had
now.
that sort of
But
thing.
I mean, she has. So if you found one with feathers covering that, they have
They
not
haven't, right?
nested.
Exactly. All right, so then all we need is.
So what should I label this as?
I'm
201
gonna
or-
give you a. I'm gonna give you one of these, and you can write all that information on that, and then just stick it in there. But you don't have to seal it. Just stick it in.
Before you let her go, I wanted to see her coloring.
So I mentioned before how neat it would be to balloon out on the landscape and try to get at this 4.6% decline. It's just not practical, and I don't really have funding or personnel to do that kind of broad brush across the entire state, as much as I'd like to. So in lieu of that, we've really focused more and more reductionist with this population we have, and we keep testing hypotheses that relate to individual reproductive performance. We're really in a drum roll right now because we're very excited to find out what Dr. Jamie Jakoski uncovers in terms of paternity, along with Mo Goodnow, graduate student who's going to finish in spring. Alexei Kimyadik is just coming on board, and he wants to test hypotheses that look at physiological condition and how it relates to reproductive performance. And so he's going to do blood assays of physiological condition, looking at stress hormones and carotenoid concentrations. And so for now, we're still trying to but we're trying to look as in-depth as possible at the level of individual reproductive performance to quantify what characteristics of individuals show measurable differences or correlations with reproductive performance. And it's not just who pairs and who fledges young, but how many young in a particular population is a particular male responsible for siring. So And then we'd also very much like to get at the variation in female reproductive performance. There's going to be less, we suspect, because females are almost certainly guaranteed of raising a brood. You know, they're the ones that lay the eggs. So it's a little bit different for females, but we'd very much like to contrast that too. You know, how do females perform over many years when compared to males? And of course, once we do start getting this paternity data in, we'll keep collecting that. But once we do get that data in, we'll start looking at, you know, which males that successfully had extra pair copulations or extra pair fertilizations, which males were they? You know, where did they occur? What habitat were they in? What position were they in their respective neighborhoods? What kind of phenotypic characteristics did they have? You know, we'd like to get into song, and we've done some measurement of the bib and how full it is, to see if there are any of these sexually selected characteristics, phenotypes, that females are choosing that relate to a particular male's genetic performance in a given season. So it's that level that we're at. And until I have the time to, well, until I'm successful at getting more funding, I don't really see taking on a broader geographic area, even though I'd like to.